The sound of my 9-year-old daughter hitting the floor of the Newport Yacht Club wasn't an accident. It was a statement. My father, Robert, had physically yanked the founder's chair out from under her to seat my brother's son. Only true heirs sit at the head, he announced to the board members, his voice dripping with old money and cruelty. The room froze. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I adjusted my suit jacket, walked over to where he stood, and dropped the bound document I'd been holding, the red ledger, right next to his scotch. It landed with the heavy thud of a verdict. Read the last page, I said. My voice was calm, lethal. Then I took Mia's hand and walked out, leaving him with the evidence that would turn his legacy into ash. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's standing with us today. The silence inside the car was heavier than the screaming I had expected. Mia sat in the passenger seat, her small hands gripping the seatbelt strap like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. I glanced at her sideways. No tears, just that terrifying, hollow stillness of a child trying to make themselves invisible. I reached out and touched her shoulder, checking for injuries without making a big deal of it. She flinched, then leaned into my hand. That flinch was the only evidence I needed. My father hadn't just bruised her knee. He had fractured her sense of safety. He had looked at my daughter, the only good thing I had ever built, and declared her structurally unsound for his precious legacy. I didn't drive home. Home was where the memories of holidays and family dinners lived, and I wasn't ready to face those ghosts yet. I drove to the industrial district, to the converted warehouse that served as my private office. This was my sanctuary. The one place my father had never stepped foot in because he thought it was too small time. He liked glass towers and marble lobbies. He didn't understand that the real work happens in the quiet, dusty corners where the blueprints are actually drawn. We pulled into the bay. I helped Mia out, her hand feeling small and cold in mine. We're going to hang out here for a bit, okay? I said, keeping my voice steady. I have some work to finish. She nodded, trusting me with a blind faith that made my chest ache. Inside, I set her up on the leather sofa with her sketchbook and a hot chocolate from the kitchenette. I turned on the warm desk lamp, creating a small island of light in the cavernous room. Then, I sat at my desk and woke up my monitors. My father thought power was volume. He thought authority came from how loud you could yell or how much space you could take up at a table. He didn't realize that in the modern world, power is silent. Power is access. And for the last 10 years, I had been the gatekeeper. I was the one who modernized their systems, secured their cloud storage, and integrated their financial databases. They treated me like the IT guy, the fixer they called when they forgot their passwords. They never stopped to think that the person who builds the lock also keeps the master key. I opened the command terminal. The screen blinked with a rhythmic, green cursor, waiting for instructions. I wasn't angry in the way a man gets angry when he punches a wall. That is sloppy. That is wasteful. I was angry in the way an architect is angry when he sees a building that violates code. Cold, objective, and ready to condemn the structure. I typed in the administrative override code. A list of users populated the screen. They were all there, logged in. Probably drafting damage control emails or checking bank balances to see if I had touched the money yet. They had no idea the ground was already gone. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a flicker of remorse. I selected my father's account first. I initiated the lockout protocol. Access denied. The status light turned from green to red. I moved to Brandon's account, my brother, who posted photos of his legacy while I did his math. Access denied. Then my mother. Access denied. One by one, I severed their connections. I locked the servers. I encrypted the client databases. I revoked their digital certificates. It took less than 5 minutes to dismantle the digital infrastructure of a 40-year-old company. It was a silent demolition, no dust, no noise, just a cascade of error messages popping up on screens across the city. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the cooling fans, the only sound in the room. This was what real protection looked like. It wasn't puffing up your chest or shouting threats. It was methodical precision. I had just blinded them. I had cut their lines of communication and locked their vaults. They were trapped in a glass tower with no way to see out and no way to operate. I looked over at Mia. She had fallen asleep, her head resting on her arm, a half-finished drawing of a house with a tall fence under her hand. I watched the steady rise and fall of her breathing. My father had tried to teach me that being a man meant dominating those weaker than you. Tonight, I was rewriting that lesson. Being a man meant building a fortress so strong that the monsters outside could scream all they wanted and your child wouldn't even wake up. The phone on my desk lit up. It was my father. Then Brandon. Then the office line. The dashboard showed login attempts spiking. Failed, failed, failed. They were waking up. They were realizing the doors were locked and the lights were out. I didn't answer. I simply turned the phone face down. The silence in the office wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with leverage. I sat there in the blue glow of the monitors. The only sound, the hum of the hard drive, and the scratch of Mia's pencil. I let myself think about the last decade. 10 years of shadows. 10 years of fixing. People saw the legacy firm and they saw Robert's charisma. They saw Brandon's flashy smile at groundbreakings. They saw Susan's elegant charity dinners. They didn't see the cracks in the foundation. They didn't see the structural rot. I was the one who went in after the lights were off and reinforced the beams. I was the silent architect. I remembered the first time I realized my role. It was 7 years ago. Brandon had mismanaged a massive commercial project in downtown Seattle. He had ignored zoning laws, overspent on materials, and alienated the contractors. The city was threatening to pull the permits. My father had stormed into my office, not to ask for help, but to demand it. Fix it, Ryan. You're good at the boring stuff. The boring stuff. That's what they called compliance. That's what they called solvency. I fixed it. I spent 3 weeks sleeping under my desk, renegotiating contracts, pleading with inspectors, redesigning the entire structural plan to meet code without blowing the budget. I saved the project. And at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, my father stood on the podium with his arm around Brandon and said, "My son has vision." He didn't even look at me in the crowd. I stayed. That's the question I know you're asking. Why? Why did I stay for 10 years of that? It wasn't because I was weak. It wasn't because I was afraid of leaving. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. When you grow up in a house like mine, you are taught that love is not a birthright. Love is a transaction. You are loved only as much as you are useful. I was conditioned to believe that my value lay in my utility. If I could just fix enough problems, if I could just save them one more time, maybe they would finally see me. Maybe they would finally value me. I treated their affection like a project that just needed better management. I thought if I worked harder, I could earn my seat at the table. But 3 years ago, the illusion cracked. The firm was bankrupt. Truly bankrupt. My father had leveraged everything on a high-risk development that failed. The banks were calling. The creditors were circling. They were going to lose the house, the firm, the name, everything. My father was panic-stricken, a deflated balloon of a man. My mother was weeping in the kitchen. Brandon was nowhere to be found. So I did the unthinkable. I liquidated my own portfolio. Money I had saved from my own private investments. Money I had put aside for Mia's future. $1,200,000. I injected it into the firm as a private loan. I saved them. Again, I remember handing the check to my father. He didn't cry. He didn't hug me. He took it, looked at the number, and let out a sigh of relief. "Good," he said. "We can make payroll." That was it. No thank you. No acknowledgement that I had just bought their survival. And in the years since, they had conveniently forgotten that the money was a loan. They treated it like a donation, like tribute. I looked at the server logs. Access attempts were spiking. They were waking up. They were realizing the doors were locked. I wasn't just an employee they could fire. I wasn't just a son they could bully. I was the creditor. I owned the debt. I owned the infrastructure. I had spent 10 years building the very cage they were now trapped in. I realized with a cold jolt that I hadn't been building a legacy for them. I had been documenting their incompetence. Every file, every email, every altered ledger entry, I had saved it all. Not because I planned to use it, but because I was meticulous. I was the architect. And now, I was going to use those blueprints to bring the whole thing down. I wasn't staying anymore. The chain was broken. I didn't need their love. I needed my money back. And I needed justice for my daughter. The fallout wasn't immediate silence. It was noise. A cacophony of digital panic. It started about 20 minutes after I locked the servers. My phone, which I had turned face down on the desk, began to vibrate against the wood. It buzzed. It stopped. It buzzed again. A relentless, frantic rhythm. They had hit the wall. The passwords didn't work. The emails wouldn't load. The cloud was dark. They were standing in their glass offices, pressing buttons that no longer connected to anything, realizing that the invisible infrastructure they stood on had vanished. I didn't pick up. I watched the names flash on the screen, like a roll call of people who had failed me. Robert, Brandon, office line, Robert. Finally, the voicemail notification pinged. I played it on speaker, turning the volume low so I wouldn't wake Mia. My father's voice filled the quiet warehouse, distorted by rage and poor reception. You think this is funny, Ryan? You think you can hold my company hostage? I have investors calling me. I have the board asking why the quarterly reports are offline. You are ruining my legacy night. Turn it back on, or I will destroy you. There it was. Not I'm sorry I hurt your daughter. Not let's talk. Just my legacy and destroy you. He wasn't a father concerned about his son. He was a king, angry that the drawbridge was stuck. Then came the social media notification. My brother, Brandon. I opened the app. He had posted a photo from the gala. It was taken minutes before the incident. It showed him, Robert, and his son sitting at the head of the table. The caption read, "The future is secure. Strong lineage. Strong leadership." I zoomed in on the edge of the frame. I saw my own shoulder. He had cropped me out. He had literally cut me out of the picture before the night was even over. It was the perfect visual metaphor for my entire life. I wasn't part of the family. I was just the margin they trimmed away to make the picture look better. Then came the text from my mother, Susan, the peacemaker, the enabler. Ryan, please. You know how your father gets when he's stressed. Why did you have to provoke him with that book? He's just worried about the firm. Please, just fix it so we can go home. I stared at the words. Provoke him. As if dropping a ledger was an act of aggression, but throwing a child onto the floor was just stress. She wasn't asking if Mia was okay. She was asking me to make her husband stop yelling. She wanted me to do what I had always done, absorb the blast, so she didn't have to. I deleted the thread. I didn't block them. I wanted a record of every threat, every dismissal, every gaslighting attempt, but I didn't respond. Engagement is a currency, and they were bankrupt. I stood up. Mia was still sleeping, wrapped in a blanket I kept in the office. I called a car service to take us to a hotel. I wasn't going home tonight. Tomorrow, the real work began. The next morning, I dropped Mia off at school with extra security instructions. Then, I drove to a nondescript office building downtown. I wasn't going to the firm. I was meeting Elias, a forensic accountant I had known in college. We had been rivals then, but I respected his ruthlessness. He was the only person I trusted to look at the numbers without flinching. I walked into his office and placed the red ledger on his desk. It was the original copy, the one I had compiled over months of late nights, tracing every suspicious wire transfer and every inflated invoice. What is this? Elias asked, eyeing the binding. It's an autopsy, I said. I need you to verify the cause of death. He opened it, scanning the first few pages. His eyebrows went up. He saw the personal loans I had injected. He saw the tax penalties I had paid. He saw the unexplained withdrawals labeled consulting fees. These numbers, he said, tapping a page. This isn't just mismanagement, Ryan. This is hemorrhaging. Who is R&S Consulting? I don't know, I said. My father said it was an external strategy firm. They've been billing us $50,000 a month for 5 years. Elias looked at me. And you never met them? No. Robert handled the strategy. I just handled the infrastructure. I'll dig, Elias said. If this money went where I think it went, you're not looking at a bankruptcy. You're looking at a felony. I nodded. This was the shift. Yesterday, it was a family dispute. Today, it was a criminal investigation. I wasn't just a son leaving home. I was a whistleblower lighting the fuse. Elias didn't call me for 3 hours. When he finally did, his voice was different, tighter. Come back, he said. Now. I drove back to his office, the city blurring past in streaks of gray and steel. I tried to anticipate what he had found. Tax evasion, bribes. I was prepared for my father's incompetence. I was prepared for Brandon's greed. I wasn't prepared for what was sitting on Elias's desk. When I walked in, Elias didn't offer me a seat. He was standing by the window, looking out, holding a single sheet of paper. He turned around slowly. I traced R&S Consulting, he said. It's a shell company registered in the Caymans, but the wire transfers all route back to a domestic holding account. Okay, I said, impatient. So, Robert was funneling money out? No, Elias said. He slid the paper across the mahogany desk. Robert wasn't a signatory on the account. He didn't even have access. I looked at the document. It was a bank signature card, authorized 5 years ago. The signature was elegant, looped, and perfectly familiar. It was the same signature that had signed my report cards. The same signature that appeared on the charity gala invitations. Susan? The room seemed to tilt. My mother? She's the sole beneficiary, Elias said, his voice clinical, stripping the emotion away to leave only the raw data. $2,500,000 over 5 years. It wasn't business strategy fees, Ryan. It was debt repayment. Debt? I asked. What kind of debt? Elias pulled up a second file. Online casinos. High-stakes virtual poker. She's a whale, Ryan. A losing one. She's been bleeding the firm dry to cover her losses, and she set up the shell company to make it look like legitimate business expenses. Robert signed the checks, but she controlled the invoices. I sat down then. The air left my lungs. My mother, the peacemaker, the one who always whispered, "Don't provoke him," the one who cried silently while my father raged. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect. She had used my father's loud, chaotic temper as a smokescreen, while we were all focused on managing Robert's ego, while I was draining my own savings to keep the lights on. She was quietly siphoning the capital out the back door. She let me pay the payroll taxes from my personal account while she gambled away the profit margin. She watched me sacrifice my daughter's inheritance to save the company, knowing full well that the emergency was her own addiction. It was a masterclass in the illusion of power. I suddenly saw them clearly for the first time. Not as parents, but as performance artists. We often mistake wealth for character. We mistake position for strength. My parents walked through Newport like royalty, demanding the best tables, the deference of the board, the fear of their children. But it was all a rented facade. They didn't own that power. They had stolen it, without my money patching the holes. And without her theft hidden in the dark, they were just hollow shells. Their authority wasn't real. It was a ghost story they told to keep us in line. Robert doesn't know, I said, the realization landing with the weight of a stone. I doubt it, Elias said. The way the books are cooked, it's designed to look like market losses. He thinks he's just a bad businessman. He doesn't know his wife is the one drilling the holes in the boat. I looked at the signature again. Susan. The woman who had texted me yesterday, begging me to fix things so they could go home. She didn't want peace. She wanted the cash flow turned back on. She wasn't protecting the family legacy. She was protecting her line of credit. What do you want to do? Elias asked. This is actionable. This is prison time. I stood up. I took the file. I took the signature card. I don't want to send her to prison, I said. I want to end the performance. I had the leverage. I had the kill shot. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the fundamental lie of my existence. They demanded respect based on a hierarchy that didn't exist. They were the children. I was the adult. I was the bank. And the bank was foreclosing. Print everything, I said to Elias. I'm going to see my parents. The house was dark, except for the dining room chandelier. They were waiting for me. Not at the office. They couldn't get in. They were sitting at the scene of the crime, the same mahogany table where my father had pushed my daughter to the floor only 48 hours ago. I walked in. I didn't knock. I still had a key, though I wouldn't be using it much longer. Robert was pacing, a glass of scotch in his hand. Susan was sitting, her hands clasped tight in front of her, looking like a porcelain doll that was about to shatter. Brandon was leaning against the wall, checking his watch, as if he had somewhere better to be than his own bankruptcy. Finally, Robert barked, turning on me. Unlock the system, Ryan. Now. The bank is holding the bridge loan until we show them the accounts. He was still trying to be the CEO. He was still trying to order the janitor around. He didn't realize the building had already collapsed. I didn't answer. I walked to the table and placed the file Elias had printed right in front of my mother. I'm not unlocking anything, I said. You are destroying this family, Robert shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The vibrations rattled the fine china. You are hurting your mother. Look at her. She's sick with worry. I looked at Susan. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the file folder. She knew exactly what was inside. Open it, I said to her. Ryan, please, she whispered. It was the same tone she used when she asked me to fix the servers. The same tone she used when she asked me to forgive Dad. The tone of a parasite begging for a new host. Open it. She didn't move. Her hands were trembling too hard. So Robert grabbed it. I don't have time for your games. He flipped the pages. I watched his face. Confusion. Then denial. Then horror. R&S Consulting, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. $2,500,000. Siphoned directly from the operating capital into offshore accounts. I don't know who this is, Robert sputtered, looking at the bank routing numbers. Some vendor. Brandon. Did you authorize this? It's not a vendor, Bob, I said. It's your wife. Robert froze. He looked at Susan. The silence stretched, tight and brittle. What? Online poker, I said. High stakes. She's not a strategist, Dad. She's a gambling addict. And she's been using the company payroll to cover her losses for 5 years. The air left the room. Robert looked at the woman he had bullied and protected for 40 years. He looked at the signature card in the file, the elegant loop he knew better than his own. Susan? He croaked. She started to cry. I can fix it. I just need a little time. I have a system. I was going to pay it back after the IPO. There is no IPO, I said. There is no company. I leaned in, placing my hands on the table. The wood felt cold. I'm not here to give you a loan, I said. I'm not here to fix the servers. I'm signing a liquidation order. You can't, Robert whispered. He looked old suddenly. The bluster was gone. The volume was turned down to 0. This is my legacy. Your legacy is a fraud, I said. And as of this morning, I forwarded this file to the district attorney. It's out of my hands. That was the mercy. I didn't have to destroy them. I just had to hand the evidence to someone who didn't care about their last name. Susan wailed. A raw, ugly sound. Robert sank into his chair, defeated by the wife he thought he controlled. Brandon just slid down the wall, realizing his free ride was over. I stood up straight. I took the office keys out of my pocket, the ones for the building I had paid for, the one I had saved. I dropped them on the table next to the evidence of their ruin. Goodbye, I said. I walked out. I didn't look back. The house behind me was no longer a fortress. It was a tomb. 3 months later, I drove past my parents' estate. I didn't stop. I just slowed down enough to see the sign on the lawn. Foreclosure. It looked less like a for sale sign and more like a condemnation notice. The windows were dark. The grass was overgrown. The legacy they had killed for, lied for, and stolen for was gone. The firm was dissolved. Its assets liquidated to pay back the creditors and the victims of my mother's embezzlement. Robert was facing charges for negligence. Susan was facing charges for fraud. They weren't living in a fortress anymore. They were living in the ruins of their own ego. I turned the corner and drove to my new office. It isn't a glass tower. It's a converted loft in the arts district. It's small. It's messy. It smells like fresh coffee and drafting paper. But the name on the door is mine. Just mine. I don't have a board of directors. I don't have a legacy to protect. I just have the work. That evening, I sat on the back porch of my new house. It's modest, nothing like the estate I grew up in, but the foundation is solid. I watched Mia in the yard. She had set up a small easel on the grass. She wasn't sitting in a high-back chair. She was sitting cross-legged on the ground, paint smudged on her cheek, humming to herself. She wasn't worried about being a true heir. She wasn't worried about earning her seat at the table. She was just a child, safe in the knowledge that her father had built a wall high enough to keep the monsters out. I looked at the settlement check on my phone. It was substantial. Enough to retire, enough to buy a yacht and disappear. But that felt like something they would do. That felt like hoarding. I realized then that true justice isn't just about watching the bad guys fall. That's just demolition. True justice is about what you build in the empty space they left behind. It's the justice of the sower. If you only focus on destroying the weeds, you just end up with a patch of dirt. You have to plant something new. So, I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't buy a bigger house. I took the settlement money, every dime of the $1,200,000 I had loaned them, plus the damages, and I started a scholarship fund, the Open Door Grant. It pays full tuition for young architects who come from nothing, kids who have the talent but not the lineage, kids who are used to being told they don't belong at the head of the table. I am using the money that was meant to exclude people to bring them in. I am taking the bricks of my father's exclusionary empire and using them to pave a road for the next generation. That is the real legacy. It's not a name on a building. It's the door you hold open for someone else. Mia looked up from her painting and waved at me. Look, Dad, she called out. I drew a castle. It's beautiful, I called back. It has a big wall, she said, but the gate is open. I smiled. The air was cool. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't the silence of secrets or the silence of fear. It was just peace. I had spent my life trying to be the architect of their happiness. Now, finally, I was the architect of my own. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, share this story. You are the architect of your own peace. Don't forget to subscribe.